Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Reimagine 2021 V7. This is our 7th event. It's called History of Coins. That's why I have my Mario hat on. We're doing a little games and Mario crypto themed event. I'm very excited to have with me here today Omri Ross, who's the Chief Blockchain Scientist at eToro. Very excited for the discussion. Omri, how have the past few months been for you and your team? And then we can also get into your background and how you actually got into the crypto and blockchain space. But welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Roshan, and thanks for having me here. I'm very excited to be here. I think the last few months has been fairly crazy for anybody in this industry. I think we see much more adoptions and discussions by very serious members. We see, of course, recently Citi, we see BNY Mellon, and I think it's really building on sort of all the opportunities in this space that, with eToro being long-term into that, so that's super exciting. Yeah, also on the research side, a lot of really, really exciting things are happening now with automated market makers. Very interesting times.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of data related things happening that people are taking a closer look at for sure. It's becoming more important to our space. How did you first hear about Bitcoin or crypto? How did you actually get into the space?
I mean, super casual, like probably many people. I just, had a friend of mine sending me sort of Satoshi paper till 2011, 2012. I wasn't much into that then. I just read it and I thought that was pretty awesome. And I think I've actually heard a lot of what Yoni did around the colored coin with Vitalik and a few others around a few years later. And I think that was really, really exciting for me. But then I thought it was really early on, tokenization of assets. I actually worked before in the financial sector. So I remember sort of the crisis. I was working then at Barclays in 2008, 9, and I was like, all right, something is happening here. And I thought it was very interesting take. But I got much more full-time into that after Ethereum launch and after building some project we worked together with Nordea, which is the biggest, bank in North Europe, on some KYC projects back in 2016. And then I thought that's really technology has a lot of potential. I mean, and I moved more full-time into this space.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories of that, people moving from the traditional finance, moving into crypto. And I think that's actually a great thing because it kind of validates our space in general. And it's exciting to talk to you here today because we can get into actually talking about the technology and what effect that has. So I also wanted to ask you, how do you feel your perception of the technology has changed from when you first got in to now? Do you think the technology is the most important thing right now? And like what sort of the most exciting, I guess, progression of technology in the variety of, either distributed ledger or exchanges, or you can answer this however you want, but
sure.
How has it changed? Yeah.
I think there are a bunch of things. I think like a lot of people noticed early the potential for fintechs to run on the rails of DLT or blockchain. And I think that makes a lot of sense because this technology can offer a lot of transparency, real-time watching transaction, a lot of things that doesn't yet exist sort of in the traditional systems where they're more somewhat manual. But we've seen a lot of challenges around actually both technological, in scalability of some of the assets, but also very much also ingrained in regulatory systems and sort of changing sort of the old towards the new. And I think, there is this, I guess, famous quote a lot of people are using, from the Gandhi quote about, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you. I mean, then they fight you, then you win. And I think that it seems a lot like in the beginning, there was a lot of ignorance and laughing at the technology. And I think a lot of more people around recognize that. And I think institutions like also eToro and others that are working to be regulated and working with these technologies, I think are very exciting. And I'm really excited about also making this technology, sort of enabling it to sort of private people, which are not necessarily interested in signing private keys and holding ledgers at home. And I think we see a lot of development in all of these areas. I think that also the fact that banks seem to want to adopt more of the technology, I think is very exciting. And yeah, so I think we see a lot of positive things that are happening. I think that the connection between the technology to regulation and the scalability of the technology and the security of it are the main challenges we see moving forward. But I think they're very exciting, and different people will solve different problems.
Yeah, so kind of going deeper into that, the concept of different people solving different problems. How do you think, I guess, distributed ledger technology or even advancements in things like DeFi, a lot of things happening, I guess, on chain, not really layer two yet. Like, do you think this technology going forward, just this year or in the years to come, is it going to be the incumbents of the older financial sector coming in and like learning how they can use it for their existing business models? Or do you think we'll continue to see this disruptive trends, like what you were saying with fintechs, basically more startups rising up and disintermediating the big financial players?
I mean, I think there will be both, but I think I'm more excited about fintech startups moving within this space. I think that there are a bunch of things that need to be solved in order to really scale up this technology. I think that the obvious one, right, is the tremendous cost right now on layer one solutions, at least as they are called. But I think there are other elements which are they're equally important that are not solved yet. So in order to offer sort of stuff like DeFi, right, where is the KYC announced into DeFi? How do we actually, figure out the customer, figure out the money is used without sort of AML and all of the other requirements? So I think there will be a lot of more work in this space in order to lead for a lot of adoptions direct. And I think that in terms of other fintech startup, I think there will be a lot of connecting of sort of different liquidity pools and different opportunities all over the place once this is solved. So I think KYC is a big one and sort of working with AML. I also think that scalability seems to be something that can be solved. And I think accessibility will see a lot of more work in there, right? I think it will be really exciting when you can just download an app and make sort of any simple investment in DeFi in that regards, and without necessarily signing up wallets and doing some more complex stuff. And yeah, so I think there are a lot of interesting aspects in these areas. I think it will take a few years to see much adoption there. And I think a lot of what we see now in DeFi is really experimental. And I think there will be level of dealing with more stuff that is maybe doing less, maybe yield farming and things that we see today, but more of actually enabling people to actually take loans, access to finance in a more sort of direct areas. And I think this will be very, very exciting. And I really want to see more work in that. I know there are a lot of companies working in this space. I think that we have to also solve the regulatory harden around this stuff in order to really scale up such technology and really make it accessible, like instant loan that are taken that are maybe based on liquidity all over the space. I think this could be really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. There's still more regulatory hurdles to come, so to speak. I also do think we've been making progress in that area a bit in terms of a lot of the regulators just understanding the underlying technology and then understanding the risk for that. And I think because the risk profiles are kind of very unique, this is technology, like you said, that's more liquid, more transparent, and sometimes it's hard to regulate because it's so open and decentralized in some cases. And I guess that does pose some risks. What like going forward in just the evolvement of the space, we've had, enormous interest in DeFi and different things like that. And it's been driven by a lot of companies making developments in things such as price oracles to just garner more trust. So what would you say is the next piece of technology you think that will help our industry just move forward? Like, you think we should continue on this path to like build more price oracles and build more feeds like that? Or do you think it needs to come in the form of, I don't know, increased security maybe on your device for people?
I think something that is really interesting, and I think a few people mentioned, but it's not as common, is actually understanding the risk management of some of these assets, because you have a lot of composability within smart contracts and sort of DeFi applications, and then you sometimes can, borrow an asset in some place, say Compound, and use it in order to offer liquidity in one of the yield farming, your favorite one, and so forth, and move on. And then we can see issues of liquidization that can happen, between different assets, between different also products. And I think the technology, what is so sweet about sort of DLT and blockchain is that you can actually assess this risk much better because you can actually see the source of funds and how often it's composed in different assets. And I would love to see more work there. Like, I think it would be really, really interesting to see how do you actually assess the risk of, if you like it, financial stability in the world where tens of billions in DeFi and even more, because you can actually try and aggregate some worst case scenario. We did some research work on that was pretty interesting about trying to start understanding the risk in DeFi. So I think this will be an interesting development. I'm just wondering who will do this job because I could see it's more fun for people to involve with projects that can lead for the entrepreneurs for better success. Other things are really, if we want to move towards vast adoption, are issues around KYC, really knowing the customer on the other side as much as possible in order to be able to sort of work closely with regulation, as well as issues around accessibility. Again, putting up a really sweet, a mobile app that finds your nice, yield farm or whatever and does it for you. I mean, there are today some applications that offer a nice interface. I think eToro is one of them because it offers a very simple approach to it, but also like wallet like Argent and others that also offer you like interesting ways to enter that space.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of demand for people to get access to a lot of these things. And I agree with you. I think these things are a barrier right now, but they're just things that we need to solve for. So kind of going deeper into that to have our viewers kind of understand you and eToro a bit better. Can you tell me a little bit about what your role is, and also tell me more about the eToro X Labs? Talk to me more about your R&D, blockchain initiatives and what specifically you all are looking at, because I think it's very hard for people to understand, what a lot of what companies like yours actually focus on.
Sure. So yeah. So my role is, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, eToro has been pretty early within the blockchain space. Also from the times of sort of colored coin and sort of trying to tokenize assets already on the Bitcoin network. And I think that's also how I got to sort of know Yoni in this space, our CEO. And I think in that regard, it was also natural. So we used to be sort of a private company called Firmo that was acquired by eToro. And as part of that, we started working with tokenization of assets for eToro, which was a big thing that we've done. And it was sort of pretty exciting as part of sort of the eToro X sort of exchange and platform to offer some settlement with different stablecoins. Another thing we worked on are a lot of projects also around staking that it offers a lot of value for eToro customers. So now they are purchasing, say, ADA or Tron on our application, and then directly you will start receiving staking rewards, which will act the same as receiving interest for a customer. So we're always working on sometime building some more sort of complex product, but then offering them on our platform as sort of simple manners. Other stuff we're doing is also stuff around contributing to sort of research in the work, stuff like research on projects such as Good Dollar that eToro sort of contributed to, and Yoni sort of funded, which offers sort of UBI, universal basic income. I had last time I checked, so I think 50,000 users have signed to the platform. So a lot of interesting projects also for the community. Apart from that, we also helped, we presented in DevCon a language for building sort of financial derivatives, which was functional and a lot of other interesting elements. So I think part of our work is actually enabling some of this technology as a simple product on the eToro app, as we said, like buying ADA and start receiving interest without sort of doing anything about it. And other stuff could be either integration to existing projects or working directly with research sort of supports for the general good of the blockchain industry.
Okay, yeah, that's actually pretty interesting to know that you're focusing. So I guess some of your time on research and the other part of your time in actually understanding the technology. What can you tell me just for I guess from your perspective? Do you think that do you think that institutions or retailers care more about how the technology actually works? So like going back to what we were discussing about institutions and their interests, they use a lot of, I guess, custody services, and don't get that exposure all by themselves. However, retailers get all of the exposure, most of it just by themselves, because they have free access to do so. So from a technological viewpoint, do you see these traditional companies, hiring chief scientists such as yourself, or do you think it'll be a structure where the crypto companies are the ones that have a deep understanding of the technology, and we sort of build bridges, I guess?
I think it's first it's a very good question, and I think it has several phases. I think one of the things that I like about the industry is that really research and sort of industry are highly connected. So I also act as a sort of as an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen, and I lead a financial transparency group where I work with a lot of sort of institutions in the Nordics mostly. And I think what we see there is that, of course, sort of the old financial institution, they move not as fast as fintechs or companies such as eToro, which is sort of large enough, but still moved out in a very fast phase. And I think that you can't expect them at the short term to have as much innovation as you'll have in fintech startups or even largest companies as eToro. And I think that what I love about the space is really that the two are connected. There is often much more knowledge in the industry, in my experience, than sometimes in the academic area. So often, when we actually present in academic conferences, we feel that, maybe we are in position well to talk about stablecoins once we're running hundreds of millions on that daily volume with this technology, and we understand all the technical and security challenges with that. And I think it's a very sweet point. I think part of the fact that people like myself and others taking sort of a scientific sort of senior roles in companies such as eToro shows the adoption of large fintech into the space. And I think that the old ones will have that too, but it just works a bit slower. And I think taking time forward, I don't think that this technology will be ignored by any financial institution, because it makes a lot of sense. I mean, where does it make sense? Think about the previous crisis we had. There were a lot of discussions about the role of derivatives in this market. And if you take the BIS sort of reports, the size of this market of derivatives is, I think, is major. It's more than 500 trillions. It changes from every year in the reporting, but this means like 7 times more GDP sort of in amount, right? So the risk on economy on this contract is huge, and they used to held by Excel files between different banks. So how can you really assess systematic risk in this element? So I think the technology that we deal with for blockchain, to see all of the asset tokenized, understanding the custody, having complete clearance on it, checking them in real time, see where the assets are moved between one place to another, even if you don't know the specific individual bank, means that you can actually really assess your risk much better. So I think in this regards, we'll see more and more adoption. And I think as part of it, we'll see more sort of also scientific roles within largest corporation, which will just take a little bit more time.
Yeah, for sure. Before they start hiring, I guess they need to even understand, what viewpoint they really want to have. Do they want to build products, or do they want to help manage risk? What I was going to ask you is, what effect do you think, having, like, I guess going back to retailers, just normal people having access to widespread data on everything from on-chain transactions, and I guess maybe even some off-chain transaction, what effect do you think that will have? What do you think it will democratize? Do you think it will democratize people's access to other financial products, or do you think people will actually do something with that data? I would be curious to hear maybe like 2 ideas you might have that could either be helpful or just interesting ideas of what can you do with all of this data that is being generated every day. People always joke that 1 crypto day equals about 3 days in the traditional world, because we're always on.
It's a good point. I think that this is also partly because still the crypto space is still involved with a lot of sort of early movers or early people that went into this space. And I think as more and more adoption happens and it's become more of a pure retail customer, when Bitcoin or things like this are part of portfolios of everyone in their pension fund or so of things like that, then we'll see, I think, hopefully less volatility and more adoption in there as well. But I think what we see today is actually a continuation of a lot of the works and stuff that we've seen for many years in eToro. So you see a lot of sort of retail customers having much more effect into really what happens and really saying, we want to take part of this game. And also to some extent, which is very nice, they support companies that they believe in. So it's moved from maybe often being a totally sort of only financial sort of decision, more and more investing in green energies, companies like sort of, and you can see the sort of the growth in companies such as, for example, and I'm not now discussing bubbly or not bubbly behavior, but if you look at companies like Beyond Meat and Tesla, these are companies representing more green energy, more green sort of food. And you see that they've been successful. And I think that the roles of retailers as part of it is significant. Another thing that we also see around the time is that actually, and that's one of the things that we've been doing with eToro, is all the element of social trading. The idea of saying people will actually be willing to share with you their information and be willing to share with you the trade. And we also seen in our in our popular investors, they were quoted talking about the element that they're actually very proud at helping, anybody to invest. This is sort of strategies and investment style that they take for retail investors are actually offered for them and not offered just for, the richest people in the world as part of some hedge fund, things like that. And I think it's very interesting. I think that it's very also blurry line because, people need to do their own research if they choose that. And that's kind of need to be well understood by people that are looking into the space. But at the same time, it's a big opportunities for people actually to make a say and, for the retail market to make a say. I think it's really exciting in this regard to see what is happening.
Yeah, and a lot of the products that you all are working on, you're essentially creating new markets. I think you mentioned social trading, and these things haven't really been done on a wide scale before. People haven't really interacted in this way. And with all of the different things like the GameStop craze and the crazy stock market in the US, we've seen a lot of the rise of that, the concept of social trading and people being driven more by sentiment. And I think the interesting part about crypto is it is driven a lot by the sentiment in combination with the technology as well. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, looking forward, what are some interesting, I guess, product developments that you all are thinking about focusing on? Is it going to be continued to be focusing on just retail and kind of earning interest, or do you think there's a way that people can, I guess, use their crypto to maybe support real world projects? I haven't seen much of that yet. Like, it's not as easy to, I guess, have access to have real influence on real world projects.
Can you explain more about what you mean by real world projects?
Yeah, so like a lot of, I guess, crypto and blockchain startups out there, I've seen a lot of people, they want to help support these startups, but it's still difficult because a lot of these startups are raising in traditional ways, or they're not fully using a blockchain. So I wonder, what do you think, like, what is the bridge we need in order for regular people to also be involved in just supporting, I guess, blockchain startups more?
Yeah. I think the reason why I was often very excited about fintech and blockchain is the fact that, money is already virtual, right? It's an idea. We can have a long discussion of that, and you must have done it before many times. But, the idea is that it's a number somewhere on a ledger, regardless what your ledger is. And I think that's also when you mentioned oracles earlier in this conversation, it's sort of getting some information, but most of the information is on the ledger. And I think that's why I think fintech is a really good market and very good fit for the blockchain technology. I mean, we'll see more adoption in more regular other elements, such as, we discussed there were some early experiments with shipping like Maersk and so forth, but I think we'll see more of them. The Oracle problem there is way higher, right? Because when you transfer a package somewhere in Cameroon or whatever, and you want to actually figure that out, you somehow have to transfer and handshake that happen in person to a ledger, and that's much more complex. While financial transaction is really eventually just some transfers between two addresses or two individuals. So I think this is a very good space for that. I think in order to get much more adoption, we still need to solve much more regulation and scalability challenges in this space. And I think a lot of that is happening as we speak. I mean, you start seeing the discussions happening by the US regulators. You see very large corporations discussing it. And I'm very excited about it. I think that I hope that the promise of Bitcoin will actually push people to actually support startups that actually build other products, not necessarily Bitcoin, into this space. So I'm super bullish about it and loving the technology. But I think really, once we get further scalability and regulation, we can see much more sort of active works happening within this space. In terms of what we're building, we try to, of course, enable more and more products sort of to our clients, but we also have to work hand in hand with regulators. And I think that means that sometimes in the size of the company like eToro, right, it's, running off to $1 trillion transaction a year, having regulated sort of entities all over, it's of course more complicated to have a product than if you were sort of a young DeFi startup that just bring in a bunch of products and test in production and put it out there, right? There's a different sort of element there, and I think there are different players taking different parts in that. I think our role is really maybe being one of the early places for people to access this technology and feel safe about what they access in this technology, and and also helping sort of educated regulators at the process of actually enabling it. And I think that's also put us very strategically as more and more growth happen in this technology to actually offer more products and more services around the space. But I think for real startups growing around the space, we still see sometimes, but there are excellent use cases. I mean, KYC is one, loans and others are others. So I think this will happen. It's just a question of time to scale the things up.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, thank you for explaining your thoughts there. I think there definitely needs to be more bridges to make it easier for people to actually understand how they can, I guess, use a lot of their assets. Step one is maybe educating people on what it actually is, like retailers and even large governments or banks. They all I put them in this one bucket, just like kind of layer one of education before we even talk about layer two or anything like that. Kind of zooming out for a second, because we were talking about regulation. How would you explain to people, a lot of people don't understand how, I guess, the financial sector can still exist and then crypto can still exist. Like a lot of people think there's a reckoning happening, so to speak, where the crypto market is just getting larger and larger, having more influence, and then this means that traditional finance just won't work. So can you talk maybe even from a technological perspective of how do you think these two different ideologies, which is traditional finance, and then we have new finance, crypto, DeFi, all this stuff, how do you think we can make it interoperable? Or maybe you don't, maybe you just think the crowd will go one way or the other.
Yeah, but I think I totally agree that they will come to some agreement. I think that it's maybe a bit classical in some sense that you have on one hand very new sort of encryptions and super interesting elements happening by startups that want to move like lightning fast and getting things done. And then you have the sort of regulation, and you have the regulation in a very traditional and fundamental industry, right? Because finance is a very, very sort of basic layer sort of industry for all people, right? To be able to support their families, their education, food, etc., etc. So I think we cannot expect that very traditional industry to move fast. And also to some extent, you cannot expect a sort of traditional industry to be always embracing changes when, if you're a big player that already, have a lot of customers and other elements, maybe you're happy with the way things are, more or less. On the other hand, you see that this technology has some places where it can create a lot of value. I think really around risk, and you call it interoperability before, like discussing interoperability between blockchains, but I think there are a lot of connection, there are a lot of bridges that this technology can build because of the composability of smart contracts and the potential of it, because of the composability of potential different technology together, and also because of the fact that it actually build bridges across us regardless for regulation of different countries. So I think that these elements and the elements of really accessing real-time risk and financial products and 24/7 sort of support of that is something that have a space and will make a difference. But I think it will take longer time to sort of connect to the traditional market. But I think they will have to sort of connect together. I think that we should also give respect to what is working so well on the whole financial system, especially in much more in places like the US and Europe and others, in Australia and many others, because you have systems that, run transactions sort of in milliseconds, right? Using your credit cards or others, and are sort of very, very low cost for that, right? And all of it is sort of happening. So these systems are pretty well. I mean, taking a loan to, buy a flat in Europe today when the interest rate is so low is a nice experiment, right? You're not paying too much, you're getting a nice service for it. So I think we need to also notice that the actually financial system seem to work, right? There is today a lot of access for people to traditional financial market, and going back to when this technology can offer 10x better, it will take time because we have issues around security, we have issues around scalability. But I think that we will see that it will just take a bit longer term, and I think the focus hopefully will be about the thing that this technology can do better, which is opening the market for everybody and offering products across the globe 24/7, where people can actually examine these products and they are composable one to another, and the element of really assessing risk at real time. And I think that's something that governments may not look enough into, because I think the potential of looking into the risk of all financial contracts at all time, and monitor them and understand if there is a risk is really interesting. I mean, when people talk about the previous financial services, who knows what sits on one bank's balance sheet and what would be the elements of making some decisions. And I think this potential that exists there can also make a lot of difference for financial risk long term if handled correctly.
Yeah, it would be great to get some of these banks to use just blockchain distributed ledger technology to just kind of open source some of their balance sheet or show more people how leveraged they are, right? I think that's something that like everyday people just don't understand. And even people in crypto, the more and more you learn about the value of all these technologies we're discussing today, they're only really valuable once you learn about how leveraged some of traditional finance is, and how there's not as many checks and balances as people realize. Like when people compare and contrast things like DeFi, there's different metrics of that. I wanted to ask you, because something that
I want to just comment quickly on
go
that.
ahead. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it's a great point about leverage. And I think that's what also when I discussed before risks in DeFi, we can actually monitor a lot of this leverage by actually seeing how often the same money is used again and again in some of these applications. Ether held, on MakerDAO to create DAI and then bought something else and sort of leverage into other assets. I think this is really fascinating. And as you said, if we can see a balance sheet online, understand that leverage, I think that will be a great sort of system to actually monitor things live. You don't have to wait for financial statements quarterly, because you can actually see transactions that are happening and anonymized live. And that will be like a fantastic element of seeing all balance sheet all the time, and creating some graphs of how different banks or others are connected. I think it creates a different level of transparency, and I think it can do wonders. I think we are still far away from it, but this is exactly what you said is the potential that I see in that long term. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so that's fine. Demographically, we might not know. It's like kind of surprises everywhere, up in the air. A lot of people have different predictions, but how about this? Let's switch. Let's turn the tables. A lot of things we're discussing today, like there's some issues that we got to solve. From your, for the people listening to this, it might be some developers or even some students, and they love to solve problems. Basically, they always like to get inspiration on what to build or what they should focus on. What are, I guess, 3 things that you think developers should be focused on, or even interesting projects that you'd like to see more of in the space to create positive value? Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of people working on them, but the obvious first one I mentioned before, which I think is underrated at the moment, is issuing around KYC. I think eventually we talk about adoption, and we know adoptions in the end means that end customers get access to stuff and regulations. And we're living in a world that KYC is an integral part of. So I think the opportunity there is immense to offer sort of eventually not just some random address putting something somewhere, trying to actually connect. I think this will be a very important bridge to sort of normal financial services. Other places is, so that's the main project. Another element is really some interesting element around scalability and interoperability, which means really seeing how You can create, scalable, large terms transaction elements. There are a bunch of ideas around how to use that. I'm not going to get super specific here. And I think the sort of the last one would be actually element dealing with sort of security and sort of also to deal a little bit with insurance on the security side to see, can we actually insure product? Again, remember that when we are dealing on the blockchain space, right? If you make a transaction, you made the wrong transaction, there is no one to call. There is no 1-800 number you can call and sort of get some support. So in that regard, we need to really understand, in order to get adoptions, we need to be able to offer some insurance products around this space. I think these are very, so at least these are my three. I think that a side comment, because I find myself telling it to a lot of people, is I think that this space seems to grow and I believe will continue growing. You can't, I'm not predicting sort of how the market move, but I think the interest in this element in fintechs is going to, I believe, proceed. So I think it's a good investment to enter this space and understand sort of the potential, at least for fintech in this space. And I think I usually, at least when I speak to some of my computer science students, I say there is very low sort of, if you go to it, you're a developer, you're always going to get a great job. But going into the space, if the space will grow equally to what we've seen in machine learning or other elements in the past 10, 20 years, you're going to be extremely well informed, having really core sort of skills, and you'll be valuable and build bridges for the years to come. So.
Yeah, for sure. This space it's growing, a lot of positive value being created, but the one thing that I really like about it is it's very accessible. There's no real prerequisite. We always welcome people with like knowledge from other sectors, but even like people such as myself, I just got in as a student in the very beginning. But to kind of end things off, what do you see in the end of 2021? What is the next, I guess, financial instrument or even technological application that you think people will try out and not go back to? To preface this, I think last year it was mainly the concept of yield. A lot of people are realizing that keeping it in the bank, they're really not getting any benefit. So for this year, inside of the whole macro world, everything that's going on with printing money in the pandemic, we're living in this new environment. We already have been in for a whole year. So what do you think is, so a use case, a technological application, something that people will use and just not go back to at the end of this year?
It's a very difficult question and very hard to predict. I think I would, I would say what I wish to see, but rather than what will necessarily happen. And what I wish to see may take longer to be achieved. But I think I will go back to accessibility, fun application that actually allow you access to things like that. I think in the past we saw sort of Dharma offering in early places for you to actually transfer money from a credit card and actually play around with things. So I think I want to see more accessibility to allow people easily to invest in things like that. That's also a big part of what we sort of try to do in eToro. Make you work directly, you're still connected to the, you transfer money to the platform, in any manner that you do it, but then you don't have to deal with the custody and all of the hassles that people deal with, but you just get access to some of that. And so that's one element around accessibility in general. And another element that I would like to see, but that's more my geeky side, is to see more insurance, because I think having sort of insurance products will actually offer that eventually, because if the accessibility was really focused on more retail or newcomer to come and have easy access to that and be able to participate, the sort of insurance is more going back maybe to more the institutional and traditional, and say you're used to have some kind of level of certainty. In order for you to take high risk or take bigger part in that, you need to receive sort of treatments that you could receive in sort of traditional market. And I think offering that will be very interesting. And I think there is a lot of place there to see innovation.
Yep, that's a great way to end things off, kind of the concept of unification in the space, and we need more of that. Omri, thank you so much for sitting with me here today. And welcome to the Reimagine 2021 series. Hope to speak to you again in the future. I'm your host, Roshan Mirajkar, and I'll let you all tune back into the event. Thank you.